Hey, this is Richie coming at you from the School of Marketing HQ. Before you dive into the show, I just want to tell you about a brand new short 12-week program we've launched called the Giants Marketing Masterclass. The program gives you access to insights and expert comments from over 25 CEOs and CMOs from major companies like Unilever, L'Oreal, M&S, Pret, and WPP, just to name a few. We focus on 6 key areas of marketing: customer, brand, commercial, creative, channel, and data and analytics. So if you were looking to upskill yourself or your team for just 2.5 hours each week and get access to a network with our industry's giants through our live sessions, do check out the School of Marketing website for more deets. Alrighty, for now, enjoy the show. Hello to all you wonderful people out there, and welcome to another episode of the Places We'll Go show with your hosts, Mark and myself, Richie. Now today, we have another fab guest on the show, none other than Sophia Angelis, the SVP and Global Managing Director of Jack Daniels. Welcome, Sophia.
Really great to be here, Richie. Thank you for having me.
Oh, look, absolute pleasure. Now, before we dive into the show, let me give you a little insight into Sophia's career, which honestly has been absolutely stellar. Now, before her current role, she's had a string of marketing director roles within Brown-Forman, and she's been there for around 20 years. And for all of those who may not have come across Brown-Forman, they're a massive alcohol and beverage company with some amazing brands like Jack Daniels, Finlandia, Ford's Gin, and Herradura Tequila. She has worked for a range of territories in Europe, Africa, Middle East, and India, so she really does know a thing or two about international marketing. Now, before this, she was actually in the luxury products division at L'Oreal. So I think that's probably where she's learned her craft of marketing, but we'll dig into that a little bit more in a bit. So I'm just super excited to welcome Sophia onto the show to find out more about her careers, some of the highs, and I'm sure some of the lows as well, and what advice she may have for us in order to achieve some of the things that she's done. So welcome, Sophia. Let's kick off.
Well, fabulous to have you on, Sophia. Just before we get started, we were just talking in the virtual green room about our slight connection in terms of you grew up in Greece and I worked in Greece for a while. Actually, I didn't tell you this, but the only Greek I learned was tohito ahiethi, the food has arrived, because that was all that mattered, because everything else was lost on me. Let's start there. Growing up in Greece, we've never had anybody on before, I think, that's come from Greece. So tell us a little bit about growing up in Greece.
Well, it was wonderful. And I was actually born, my mum was Swedish and my dad was Greek. And so I was born in Sweden, but grew up most of my life in Greece. And look, Greece is an amazing country full of people who are entrepreneurial, creative, go-getters, and they are people who are used to a pretty tough life, actually, and are used to overcoming obstacles and surviving and thriving in the face of adversity. And so alongside what as coming from outside, the beautiful islands, the weather, the beaches, the culture, the history, the food, importantly, there's also just a phenomenal, it's a phenomenal place to grow up. It was safe, it was fun, and certainly in my early 20s, and when you're as a young adult, it's a great place to be. So it was sort of formative in as I started, my career and went to uni, and then my first couple of jobs were effectively in Athens.
Wow, I'll tell you, Sophia, you're really selling this to me. It feels like if nothing else, I need to go visit for a holiday very soon. But so Sophia, over the past couple of weeks, I've been emailing you back and forth a wee bit, and it seems like you've got a very hectic travel schedule, clearly running a global brand, predominantly a US-based brand from the UK, perhaps has its challenges and the like. So tell us a little bit about that. What's your daily or weekly or monthly routine look like?
So I am deeply honored, actually, to be leading Jack Daniels. And it's even though the US, as you say, Richie, is really important, it's our biggest market, which comprises, I think, half of our business. Jack Daniels is ultimately a global brand. We sell Jack Daniels. We're present in 170 countries, and our consumer base is broad and diverse. And look, this is one of the reasons I got into marketing, to answer your question. It's because it's a very rich variety of topics that you deal with, from strategy to leading people to doing forecasts for production and laying down the whiskey, to creative development. And so that's just a snapshot of some of the things I do and my team does. And actually, last week, we were all together, 60 of us, 60 Jack Daniels leaders came together at what we call our home place in Lynchburg, Tennessee. And our home place is where we make our whiskey. And all of Jack Daniels comes from one single place, which is unbelievable almost. And it was important to get people together because after COVID, of course, the connections had been a little bit lost. We keep operating in a hybrid environment, it's an interesting challenge, I think, for leaders today. And we got together for a few reasons. First of all, to connect and reconnect with one another, and then to share our long-term strategy and to really help shape it and embed it with leaders from around the world. So I've literally just come back and still a little bit jet lagged.
Well, we'll scoop you up out of that. I have to say that on the underground advertising, which is pretty much probably what I most experience, I always think hats off, because obviously the heritage and the story is an amazing one, almost unbelievable, as you say. But simply for both the bothism, differentiated and distinctive consistency, distinctive brand assets. So yeah, there you go. Thought I'd say that.
Thank you.
So whiskey. We had Becky Brock on, and I think she talked most passionately about her time working in the whiskey industry. It seems to have kind of this cult thing. What is it with whiskey?
Well, I think whiskey has a certain magic to it that comes from the fact that it's crafted over time, and it requires patience, and it has because of that time, it generally has stories of its founder, and stories around the process, and stories around place where it's produced. And actually, from a marketing perspective, if you like, having those brand stories, rich brand stories, roots us in authenticity, roots us in sort of genuine stories that will engage with consumers, but also just really reinforce craft credentials. So there's something when you work for whiskey, I think that it generates a certain amount of pride that I think is because of that nature of the craftsmanship, just generates more pride, I think, than perhaps many other products. And I think generally, I've also come across people who work on whiskey are very passionate about what they do and the brand that they represent.
So it is a cult. Just coming, Richie, it is a cult. I've got the hairs on the back of my neck standing up when you talk about that, because it's, we all talk about storytelling. What if the category you're working in is so well oriented towards storytelling? But back to you, Richie.
No, look, it's a wonderful point, and I just want to perhaps just dig into this for one layer more, and particularly joining the dots between, Mark, what you were talking about in the context of the underground advertising, and then of course, Sophia, where you were last week in Tennessee. I get this great sense that Jack Daniels and the way that you position the homeland is quite remarkable, and I wonder if that's all part of it, and maybe what does the place or the geography in which it's created and manufactured play in the overarching sort of specialness or magic of the whole thing?
I think it plays a really important role. Now, whether and I think the role is whether it's kind of the reasons to believe, if you like, that we say the nature of the process, the place, the founder, etc., and whether you overtly communicate that or not, the home place or where the brand comes from, particularly in whiskey, I think permeates values, permeates some of those brand stories. Now, on Jack Daniel's, we used to be very much Lynchburg forward, if you like. And so we used to explicitly talk about the people that work there, our distillery, our tour guides, our distillery workers. We used to talk about Lynchburg that has only one stoplight. We used to talk about our process, our unique process. And what we've done is, as we've evolved and as the brand has evolved, what we've realized is that some of those stories will exist throughout the brand's life. Now, will they be front-facing or consumer-facing? Not all the time, but they'll live in a sort of universe of messaging and stories that we tell. If you think about the Scotch industry has done such a wonderful job of building where Scotch comes from, right? The distilleries and how that affects the nature of the whiskey and the taste and the flavor and the personality even of the whiskey. And so home place is really important and plays a key role.
Sophia, I'm just going to say, and I don't know to what extent you use System 1 and the work that Orlando Wood does. You probably do. It's probably all throughout, scattered in all your thinking. But the role of place, and in fact, a recognizable place, is one of the most important components when building out brand distinctive assets. So it seems fascinating front and center, and perhaps it's, for me, one of the best examples I've come across of using that recognizable place as a way to then, to get resonance within your audiences. So it's a wonderful example.
Yeah, okay, so Richie's obviously half Scottish. So I'm going to stop the whiskey loving for a second, and you said about you started your career in Greece, and so fascinated to know how it all began. Was marketing a very deliberate intent, a happy accident, or something else?
Even though I'll preface it by saying it was a happy accident, even though I studied marketing and organizational behavior at university, but I hadn't quite decided what I was going to do. And my father was in the tourism business, and so for a while I sort of dabbled in tourism, and he had a small tourism agency. I mean, we don't have that anymore, or hardly. And my first job was actually in hospitality, in the hotel business, in sales. And it was really by chance that I met, through one of our events, a wonderful woman who worked for L'Oreal, and we got talking, and she offered a connection to L'Oreal. There was a job opening. She asked, why don't you interview? And the rest is history. That was sort of my way in. So it was very, it was sort of random. Well, random in the sense that connection was coincidental, but it was what I had studied, and deep down, I think it was ultimately what my calling, if you like, was, without really knowing it at the time.
So the industry sucked you in.
It certainly did. It certainly did. And I mean, L'Oreal was a fantastic marketing school. And coming into lifestyle products and luxury lifestyle products, such as cosmetics, perfumes, all of the really where you, from a marketing perspective, again, you build brands based on beautiful stories and very much based on System 1 kind of immediate emotional engagement, was just very fascinating. And those brands as well, each one of those brands, because it ranged from skincare to perfumes to makeup, had stories of their own, whether we were talking about Helena Rubinstein, whether we were talking about Lancôme or Biotherm. And so that was really the beginning of starting to understand how marketing worked in practice, and really with these absolutely amazing brands that had, again, a very rich territories that you could dig into. And of course, Greece was a fascinating market to start in, because at the time it was a pretty undeveloped market with a high potential. So we delivered double-digit growth every year, and our marketing team of 3 did everything from the media buying, everything, literally the media buying negotiation, to our PR events, to setting up the department stores for promotions. And so for a young person to come in at the beginning of their career and have the whole gamut of marketing and very much practical application was a gift.
So many learnings in there, not least if you start small early in your career, you can take more risks, get more rich learning, etc. Just on L'Oreal, we had Lex Bradshaw-Zanger on, great guy, actually really great guy. He's doing this, being involved in it. He's doing a leadership program for his lead team. 6 sort of modules: future of learning, future of data, future of technology. So he's really investing in his people. Impressive organization. And as you say, that was your school. But what was super interesting was you said it was sort of random, but actually, basically it was networking that got you that job, because you'd had a connection, and then that led to something, and the ... So I want to talk a bit about networking, because it's so important in these days in terms of career building. So what's your sort of philosophy or practice of networking?
Yes, and networking sometimes can be a dirty word, right? And I just want to dispel that myth, because it's about making connections and building relationships. Networking, I think the word sometimes implies or is perceived as very transactional and a one-way benefit. And I think throughout my career, I've benefited from building connections and building relationships. Whether they're internal, just as important to build those internal connections and relationships, just as much as the external ones. And let me talk a little bit about those internal ones. I think if there's one thing I would say to anyone starting in marketing or starting in a company in any position, I think marketing in particular, because it's such a sort of hub and spoke, it is really at the center of working cross-functionally with pretty much every function in an organization. I would say starting to build those connections, that network of individuals, is really important, because you build trust, you make your job easier, and ultimately when the time is right and opportunities come up, you're top of mind. And so, not to mention, of course, the support that you get, whether it's through sponsorship or mentorship. And so building those connections are ultimately really important. These are people who, when you're not in the room, will talk on your behalf, speak on your behalf, and champion you.
Sophia, it's such rich insight there, and I couldn't agree more around that. Certainly in the internal piece, to forge those networks. And look, within the context of your organization, there'll be many people who are looking to forge a successful career. And I just wondered, is there any advice that you typically give them beyond, of course, fostering great alliances and networks? Is there any sort of maybe skills or advice or guidance or things that you think they should do to help elevate themselves and maybe get a bit more front of mind?
And Richie, I'm reminded of a conversation that you and I had over a breakfast coffee around the what and the how. And so, of course, as you start your marketing career, what's really important is to demonstrate the technical marketing skills, around understanding brand positioning, the mining of insights, the driving business results and understanding sort of the financials, right? The P&L, what's driving the business and what's important from a value growth perspective. So all of those sort of technical marketing skills, particularly at the beginning of one's career, are essential. Why? Because you're literally on the job. You're assigned mainly implementation, executional tasks. As you progress through your career, I mean, obviously strategy becomes more and more important, but equally, it's then the how. So it's not just what you do, but it's what we in Brown-Forman call the how are your sort of leadership abilities. Sometimes I think mistakenly called soft skills, because they're actually very hard. These are the skills you learn and you have to hone and you have to practice, and they have to do with being an excellent communicator, building relationships, being collaborative, being a great leader, and learning to lead and not manage. And so I think those skills come in and become even more important as you sort of progress. But I think those are skills that are important from the beginning, because they require us to be have a good dose of self-awareness. Because in order to be a good communicator, you have to be a really good listener. In order to be a good listener, you have to have a degree of humility and but also self-confidence, right? That you don't need to demonstrate that you are the knower in the room. And so I think even at the beginning, sort of being able to listen, to understand what motivates others and how you can position yourself to help others, I think will go a long way in building those relationships, building the network, and positioning yourself in a way that's going to be beneficial.
It's interesting. I'm joining a dot back to the Greece thing again, which is, I always remember when people would say, you know, we're very fortunate because there'll always be food on the table. So there's a very humble undertone. I have to say, in contrast to waking up to the news this morning around Twitter, where Elon Musk is clearly the big I am, but seems to be blowing the company up. But anyway, on leadership, it's a slightly quirky question, but why would you want to work for you?
I would want to work for me. Wow, that is a quirky question. And if my team were listening now, I don't know what they would. I don't know what they would tell me.
Oh, Mark, you put Sophia on the spot there.
If you were,
it's a chance for you to talk freely about your brilliant assets. Well,
if you were there with me last week, they might have said, well, she's a pretty enthusiastic karaoke singer. Not good.
Always helps.
Always helps. I think what I have learned throughout my career is to be able to step back and listen. And I've been able to bring people together and do that under circumstances that are that would typically be seen as challenging. The role that I have now, I stepped into on January the 1st, 2020. And it was the first time that a woman led Jack Daniel's globally. And it was the first time that a global Jack Daniel's or head of Jack Daniel's was based outside of the US. Now, stepped in January the 1st, 2020. We all know what happened mid-March of 2020. And so the ability to kind of pull people together, set a vision, and bring everyone along on the journey, I think is something that people would want would see in me. And this is, thankfully, it's not something that I make up. To answer your question, it's something that I've been told.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one thing. I think the other piece of it, and we were actually discussing this wonderful book called the Culture Map, which talks about leadership and communication across and how different cultures, because of how they're educated and their philosophers, how they receive information and how leadership sort of happens. the Swedish side of me has a very egalitarian style of leadership. And I think people appreciate that too, because ultimately I'm pretty collaborative and open, if you like, and not very hierarchical. Now, that wouldn't necessarily work everywhere, but in the setting, in Brown-Forman, for this team, and with these exceptional individuals that I'm very fortunate to work with, it seems to work because I get the best out of them. I don't have to micromanage anybody. I would hate to do that anyway. I wouldn't know where to start. And my job is to remove obstacles and enable them and inspire them. And I seem to be doing that.
Hey, wonderful. And absolute kudos to you. I mean, you talked about it. You talked about those two trailblazing efforts, whether they be, a first woman in the role, and certainly outside of the US. I mean, it certainly takes, I'm sure it takes a lot, but I like the way that you framed it in the context of Brown-Forman, and you've obviously been there a very long time now. So there obviously is something special about the organization. And it was interesting. So in our conversations, you used a wonderful phrase, which was being culturally additive, as opposed to try and get cultural fit. And perhaps you could elaborate on that a little bit. And I wonder what role does that play in Brown-Forman creating a happy home for people when they're there?
It's such a good question, Richie, and it's one I keep thinking about, and it's a big discussion in the company at the moment. And of course, you join an organization that has a set of values. And I think Brown-Forman, because it's family owned, publicly traded, but the family side of it means that we live our values and they come across and they sort of transpire throughout the business quite strongly. And these are, values around trust, excellence, teamwork, respect. Of course, the more individuals aspire or live those values, the more they'll thrive in the business. Now, how do you also then bring diversity, right? So that you have diversity of thinking, not just you have diversity of representation of gender, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, but also diversity of thinking so that it's not kind of one way of thinking. And that's always, I think that's always a little bit of a challenge. I think it comes back down to, if the values are the same at the heart of it, then it allows for more flexibility around this. You can sort of stretch people's comfort zones around the culture fit. You don't have to fit into a specific box or mold. You can then add to it, and it sort of adds increments. And if I think of how we have expanded globally, I mean, again, last week was a great example of our brilliant team members from Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and China. And I mean, they never worked in the US or at our headquarters. They'd never been to Lynchburg. And yet each one of these individuals lives the same values. Do they also add their own spin and their own wonderful sort of layer onto those? Of course they do. And that's what makes the company so rich.
And Mark's on mute.
Mark Ritson wrote recently about tenure and how that got you to the good stuff. And what a great example you are, Sophia. But of course, life's never perfect, and there's bang-ups along the way. And in most cases, people are successful because of things aren't always perfect. So what are some of the stuff that's come along where you've hit a bump in the road and what you've learned from it?
I remember one case where I was heading up, well, I was not heading up, I was heading up myself because there was nobody else in the role. I had a marketing excellence role, which was focused on driving all of the kind of educational frameworks and bringing sort of best industry thinking into the company. And I was called in by the then Jack Daniels president, as he was, and and basically he closed the door and said, "Well, Sophia, your role has just been made redundant." Now, and for a few seconds there, like, oh, crap. What do I do now? And then at the same breath, he said, well, so we have some other considerations for you, and sort of then outlined this new role that he proceeded to offer. And it wasn't a role I wanted at all. And I didn't want it because I wasn't prepared for it. So I was angry, really. I was sort of reacting, but also it wasn't the brand I wanted to work on. And you feel a little bit out of control, and I was hurt, and and so I walked away, and of course I accepted, right? Just to kind of make it very clear that I didn't want to be out of a job and I wasn't going to be on a high horse here. Left the office, and it took me a couple of days to sort of sit, reflect, and reflect on my own feelings and emotions, but also think about the role and think about what I was going to do. And I'm not a person that just my nature is not to dwell on negative things for a very long time. I'm generally an optimist. And so look, after a couple of days, it was like, okay, enough of the ego now. Let's put the ego aside. The pride's been hurt. Enough of that. How am I going to make the best of this new situation? And so I pivoted relatively quickly. And I think that's to the benefit of mainly me, but also the company, that ultimately after a couple of days, they got my best self. And ultimately, that role was a brilliant role. I learned so much. It gave me new skills. I got to work with new set of people on really fun, strategic, meaty projects. And it was the right thing to not give up, and to also sort of come round from a mindset perspective. Was it easy? Absolutely not. But is it worth it? Yes.
I'd say thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's stories of redundancy and sort of thinking about things and mindset changing. It was interesting when you talked about it that a lot of the things that you were going through was sort of in your mind, and it was actually a few days later where you could come out of yourself and kind of go, actually, no, let's reframe stuff that's going on in my own head to then give it my best. Through that process, and I'm sure other processes where you've had difficult times. I'm on a side note, very fortunate to say that Sophia is one of our mentors on our mentoring program. But what has the role of mentoring, perhaps, or role models or people that you go to when these times or things occur? What role do you think it has on being able to bounce back when things get tough?
So important. The mentor for me, I've had a mentor. I've had a couple of mentors actually throughout my career, and actually my first mentor was also the woman who hired me, and still to this day I've been very fortunate to work for her, with her, alongside her on a number of projects, on a number of roles. And she continues to be my mentor and go-to. And so in situations like the one I've just described is actually a great example, because the first person I went to after I left the office, that office where I was made redundant, I went straight to her. And of course, she was able to accelerate the process by which I could rationally think through and provided a really good perspective and a calm perspective. but it's not just times of crises. I mean, mentors are also, during career forks, what path do you want to take? And they're not there to provide the answer, but what I've invariably found, my mentors' perspective on things and sort of pointed questions have just made my thinking and my decision-making better. And so for me, having a mentor is really important. And I've mentored also lots of people informally in the company. And what I see the value, I mean, it's a two-way street. I get to see how people are sort of progressing and building their careers. And what I get to do is, again, ask them some questions that might unlock different thinking in a different perspective that they may not have considered before.
That lifelong mentor seems to be ultra important. I don't know if you want to take a moment just to name check, because you don't have to, but it feels remiss because clearly, they should get a shout out.
Well, she is one of the smartest people I know. Her name is Maureen Brecker. She's ex-P&G. And she based in Louisville. Maureen, if you ever hear this, thank you. She knows I'm always very much appreciative, and we've become friends through the years, through the 20 plus years of working together and sharing some vulnerable moments and emotional moments. It's you become close, and so I'm forever grateful to have had Maureen and to continue to have Maureen by my side. And what's wonderful is that we're on the same sort of brand leadership team now. And even in those small appreciation moments where you feel sometimes as a senior leader, it's sort of quite lonely, right? Because you don't get to necessarily, you don't get the same praise as when you're part of a team and you're starting out, or you don't necessarily have the same type of conversations. And she's there praising, a kind word here, a word of appreciation there, and that matters, and that's reciprocal, and so yes, it's a really important relationship.
Lovely, and all credit to Maureen, and I love the way that relationship has become one of friendship. Now, changing subjects quite a bit, you're as close as it gets to being a global citizen, and so to put you on the spot, kind of what's maybe one or two favorite countries that you like to work with? Not to holiday, but that I'm trying to draw out sort of different working styles.
Oh, this is like asking what are your favorite children?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been so fortunate to work with really different cultures. And I'll just pick out a couple because I don't know, it's very difficult to choose, but I love working with, let me pick the Brazil team, for example, the Latin American culture. Again, what I love about it is the passion, the entrepreneurialism, the creativity. I mean, and the teams are always, I mean, the passion sort of shines through. And there's and I think that's probably from my Greek roots, but there's a very warm approach that I really appreciate. Then if you go over to Asia, I was in China a few years ago, and with my Chinese colleagues, again, there's just this, I don't know if it's optimism, but the look to the future and the world of possibilities and the ambition, and particularly among sort of our young consumers, just this energy that sometimes, in more developed countries, you don't see that level of energy as much. And so that's what I really appreciate. And then so these are just a couple of examples, but this is part of what I love about my job, is to work with different teams across different countries on you know, an opportunity or a challenge. I mean, that's the brilliant part of my job.
You hit the nail on the head really when you talked about the brilliant element, and I know how both passionate and I know privileged you feel for being in that position, and it sounds wonderful to be able to work with such great cultures and teams. And you sort of almost preempted my next question, because I wondered if you know, beyond the brilliance, perhaps what would you say is some of the moments where you kind of are not all groovy in being in such a global, important, pivotal role in the organization? Are there any moments you kind of go, oh gosh, you know, the 80-20 rule must prevail in every role, I guess?
I mean, the first thing, if you're in a local market, so if you're working for the UK or you're working in France or in China, the first thing they will tell you is, oh my goodness, the global team, they never do what we ask them to do, and they always do these global programs, and it's not relevant to my market. So look, being in a global role is, the challenge is that, first of all, you have a very long-term perspective, and in a business that typically businesses are short-term oriented, right? With very few exceptions, we look at monthly, quarterly, yearly results. What we're talking about is the long-term stewardship of the brand that you work on over 5, 10, 20 years, generations of marketers, to build a brand that's consistent and that's going to grow sustainably for generations to come. So that there's a paradox and there's a tension there. And that always comes between kind of the global team and the regions and the local markets. So the kind of the time frame in which we operate and the sense of urgency. And then, of course, when you look at how much can you tailor things to local markets. And an example is, if I think about our creative development, or when we go and produce advertising, we have a process that we call, or a model, if you like, that we term globally led, locally infused. And so we have insights, we have a creative idea, we have a brand positioning that is global in its nature. Why? Because we believe that those values, those insights, and the role of the brand is consistent no matter where you are in the world. Now, how that is expressed in China versus how it's expressed in Germany or Brazil will be slightly different. And so the challenge with a global brand team and what we do is to make the decisions of, okay, when we develop advertising as an example, because that is a big investment, how much can we cater to the different markets, right? How much can it be tailor-made? And, you know, our competitor friends, Johnny Walker, for example, do a wonderful job of doing that because they've built the brand over time and have been present in many of those different markets for a long time. And so, look, those are a couple of examples of the challenges, but they are offset way more by the benefits and the great things that come with the job.
I actually think you've done a great ad for wanting to be in a global role. So, Sophia, I mean, it's where's the time gone? Last question, unfortunately, for this show, and maybe a simple one, or maybe not. We'll see. But I mean, ultimately, you've achieved so much. You're clearly not done yet. What are your hopes for the future for yourself and your career?
Well, it's a great question, because obviously, when you get to the kind of more experienced age, you start to think about, okay, well, what's next? And I think what's next is it's less about the role, if you like, and you start to really carve out what is it I like doing, and what is it that I think I'm good at, and I know what I enjoy, and what I enjoy doing is I enjoy leading teams. I absolutely love working with people, seeing them, mentoring them, developing people, seeing them grow, develop, get promoted. I love working across cultures. I love working on complex strategic opportunities. So, you know, if that opportunity arises, no matter what it looks like, you know, within the company, that would be amazing to be able to do that. At the same time, you know, the conversations I've had with Richie is also, I'd love to give back, and this is why I've started to engage as a mentor, and we've done with Brown-Forman previously, we've also done sort of workshops with charity organizations around marketing. And so, you know, what are the things that I can do as an individual to, you know, more than promote marketing, how can I do my bit? You know, having been fortunate and privileged enough to be in this situation, how can I help others and give them a leg up, so to speak, to either get into an organization or certainly help them navigate some of the organizational sort of pieces.
Sophia, wow, what a wonderful way to end the episode. It's just for me to say a massive vote of thanks. I mean, it's been brilliantly enriching as you've talked through so many different things. I just want to start by reflecting on the thought that when we talked about where does the future lie, it doesn't actually lie in a specific job title, but actually it lies in enjoyment of what you do and doing more to be more fulfilled in what you do. And so much of that is your desire and willingness to pay it forward to others, which I just think is wonderful and beautiful in that sense. But going back to some of the things, I mean, you certainly gave us a bit of a masterclass on so many areas, whether that be technical marketing ability, to the thought around leadership, and how you manage your teams, whether they be global versus local, the importance and role of mentoring and what that's done for you, whether, you know, at times you being mentored or you doing the mentoring. Thank you, Maureen, once again for all that you've done. The way that you bridge culture, I think is also remarkable. And you know, your intuitiveness, I feel, around being able to understand people and get the most out of them, something that I've certainly just kind of felt come through throughout of this. So a big, massive thank you from me. It's been a lovely, wonderful conversation, really, really insightful. I'm going to pass over to Mark for some of his closing remarks, but just thank you again.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Richie. I mean, you've covered a few things already. I love the way you talked about networking, actually, in terms of it's not transactional, it's mutual. But the very specific thing you said was, ultimately, it gets you to be top of mind. What are people saying when you're not in the room? Well, you want to kind of be programming it. That's a really important point. The other thing I loved is when you're talking about bang-ups and the fact that you were rather bluntly made redundant and pivoted, but you said you had to put your ego aside. And I think that in the end that's a sign of maturity and class as a leader and as an individual, because our egos get in our way. And we talked briefly about Twitter, and Richie, sorry, we'll never get Elon Musk on the show now, I guess. But, you know, I mean, it's not about the I am. So that was a brilliant example of that. Talked about being culturally additive. We talked about the cult of whiskey. Fascinating. And then I just love your global perspectives. I'm sorry to make you choose between your favorite babies of countries. But it's been a lovely arc, not least in ending by saying that you're now at a point where you're doing more to do your bit. And I'm sure you'll do that brilliantly, as you have done your core role throughout your career as well. So thanks also from me, Sophia. It's been brilliant.
Mark, Richie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I'm talking about what I love most. So thank you for having me.